Tov. Today's daf is daf Zion in K'subis, as we learned for Shlomo for Elazar ben Reuma and Yosef Zriel ben Chaim Michal. Yesterday we got down to the two dots, 3 lines into the wide lines on daf Zion and Aleph. Amar Chel Bar Rafuna Amar Rav Abba Bar Zavda Rav Abba Bar Zavda Amar Rav. All this was said in the name of Rav, and we'll see why we're going to refer to Rav Abba and Rav. Achas P'sula v'achas almana, whether the marriage is that of a virgin or a widow, meaning a woman who's been married before, that could be the same for a grusha, tuna bracha. Whether this is her first marriage or not her first marriage, requires brachas. We're going to talk about the sheva brachas, right? The brachas that we make at a wedding and that we make in the 6th day, the day of the wedding, plus 6 more days, the total 7 days, the Shiva Yomi. So here he says that whether it's a psula or amana requires bracha, which makes it sound that there's no difference between them. Whether a amana gets married, a previously owned woman, they came up with that term. The Cadillacs weren't used cars; they're previously owned, right? Previously married woman apparently requires the same brachas. Did Rav Huna really say this? This is Rav Huna Amar Rav Abba Bar Zavda Marav. Amar Rav Huna Amana Eina Tuna bracha. So here we see a contradiction. Rav Huna. On the one hand, Rav Huna quoted Rav Abba Bar Zavda, who said in the name of Rav that whether it's a psula or a amana, they both require, let's call it sheva brachas, right? And on the other hand, Rav Huna says that amana does not require sheva brachas. It's lo kasha. Kan the bracha shenas almana, kan the alman shenas almana. Okay, where he said that there was no, where Rav Huna said almana eina tu bracha was referring to where both the bride and the groom had been previously married. Kan the alman shenas almana, right? If it's an alman shenas almana, if they were both previously married, then they don't require any brachas. You don't do any sheva brachas. Right, same thing. No, because you get divorced. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it makes a difference whether they're divorced or not. He gives an example. He's just saying that it means that they're previously married. Alman is a widower, and alman is a widow. But I think the same thing would apply to a garush and a grusha because they've been previously married. So what are we saying now? Rav Huna said that you don't have sheva brachas. That's where a man and a woman who've been previously married, then they don't require brachas. But let's say a bachur, meaning a ravak who's never been married before, if he marries an amana, then they do have sheva brachas because on his behalf. Says the Gemara, okay, that's what you want to say now, that when Rav Huna said in the first place in the name of Rav, in the name of Rav, that whether it's a psula or an almana needs sheva brachas, that's when the almana is marrying a boy who's never been married before. But if they've both been married before, then there's no sheva brachas. So okay, that's what you're saying right now. But is that really the case for alman shenasa almana low? Yeah. No. We're talking about the day of the wedding. Well, that's what we. At this point, we don't know that. At this point in the Gemara, we're talking about sheva brachas at the wedding, not just sheva brachas at the wedding, but for the 7 days, let's say, the sheva brachas 7 days. The sheva brachos, as we're going to talk about, refers to the brachas themselves, including parvar agafim. We're going to talk that's on tomorrow's daf. We're going to see about the parvar agafim plus the 6 brachas that we make at a wedding or at sheva brachas. But that's the question over here. We're talking about apparently an alman and almana don't require any bracha at all, meaning even the day of the wedding, there's no special brachas that you make for them.
Not even the first bracha.
Not even the first bracha. Right. Not.
Sure, if you're one with
No. That we're going to talk about, but that's what we're assuming right now. At this point, we're saying that there's no right. You don't have that about. Ashir Talmud is really berachas erusin.
Right.
That's not really the sheva brachas. That's berachas erusin, which is a separate thing that you have to make. If they're getting married, that you have to make. That's part of chuppah kedushin. That's chuppah kedushin. That would be required, but we're talking about the special brachas that we bestow upon them. The Gemara says that you're not allowed to live with a kala without brachas is like woman sleeping with a nida. The Gemara gives like an example. It doesn't mean literally that, but it means like that. That if you have at this point we're saying an alman who marries an almana does not have sheva brachas, what we call sheva brachas. The berachas erusin is not the sheva brachas. That's the chuppah kedushin. But the berachas, that's what we're saying right now. Because he said, Rav Huna said on one hand that whether it's a psula or amana has sheva brachas, has brachos. We call that berachas Rashi says here, Birchas Chasanim, Tuna Bracha Birchas. That's what we call it Sheva Brachas. That means Birchas Chasanim. And on the other hand, he said, not means where they're both been previously married. But if one of them, as we'll see, but if the the boy was not previously married, right? The boy was not previously married. Now we're saying that nafkamina. Where do you say that Almana has Sheva Brachas? If the boy was not previously married, but if they were both previously married, the Gemara says there's no brachas at all. You don't make the Sheva Brachas. Says we kan ba'alman shenasa almana. Okay, kan ba'alman kan shenasa lokash kan ba'boch shenasa no kan ba'alman shenasa almana. So we're saying now that an alman, if they both been previously married, there is no Sheva Brachas. There's more ba'alman shenasa almana low. Is that really the case? That if an alman marries an almana, there is no Sheva Brachas? Amar Nachman Amali Huna bar Nasan. Huna bar Nasan said to me, Tana, he learned like this. How do you know that by Sheva Brachas you must have a minion? Where do you get the idea? You know, they always say Sheva Brachas, you ever come in for the Sheva Brachas, you can have a minion. Not talking about the Panim Chadoshos. That's another thing we're going to come to, that you have somebody new, right? Shabbos is the Panim Chadoshos. How do you know that? So how do you know that you're supposed to have 10 people there? Shenemar, it says Vayika Chasar Nashim. In Rus, what happened? Boaz took 10 men, ear of the elders of the city. By Yomer, and he said, Shvupo, and they sat here. And he said, listen, he didn't want to make the Yibam, so I'm doing it, etc. By Yeshev, when they sat there, he took 10 people. Now, what do you mean he took 10 people? He took 10 people, apparently, to make Sheva Brachas. Why do you need 10 people there? Because we had made Sheva Brachas. Boaz, Alman Shanas Almana Have. We know that Rus was an almana, right? Her husband died. That was the whole story of Rus and Naomi, right? Naomi's 2 sons died, and Rus was married to one of them. So she was for sure an almana. And we know, how do we know Boaz was an almana? So the Gemara, Rashi quotes the Gemara in Bava Basra. It's Bava Basra, Daf Tzadik Aleph. There it talks about that Iftzon was Boaz. Iftzon was a judge, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters. So obviously he was married before. So we know that Boaz and Rus were both an almana, and yet he had brachas. Boaz alman shenas almana. So how could you say that an alman who marries an almana has no Sheva Brachas? When he said into bracha, Einatun Brachas called Zion. He doesn't need Sheva Brachas for all 7 days. But the day of the wedding, you ask, what are you talking about at the wedding? At the wedding, the day of the wedding, you do have Sheva Brachas. What do you mean the day of the wedding? At the wedding itself and at the sudas, any sudas that they had on the day of the wedding. You might have, maybe they got married at night and had one the next day. That one, for 1 day, you do have, in other words, you have Sheva Brachot for 1 day, for Yom Echad. That's what he's saying now. So now we're saying that what? That if the girl is a psula or the man is a ravak who's never been married, then you have Sheva Brachos for all 7 days. If they've both been previously married, you only have Sheva Brachos for 1 day, which is what we do. What about this? We just had the other day. Now, what's the reason why an almana gets married on Thursday? Why Thursday? So he'll be with her Thursday night, and that's why we said he shouldn't have on Thursday, because they don't get to go to work the next day, and we want him to spend 3 days of joy and happiness with her together. So it says the Chacham were diligent on the Tekanos Bas Yisrael. In other words, they were concerned with the Tekanos Yisrael's welfare, even the almanas. Shei Samechim Gimel Yom in 3 days. What are you talking about 3 days now? You just said if it's an alman and an almana, it's 1 day. If it's a psula or a bachur, either one, right? If either one was not married before, then it's 7 days. So what do you get 3 days from? If it's a boy who's never been married before, he needs 7. And if he's an alman, only 1 day is enough. So what do you mean? We're talking about alman. It says you should spend 3 days with her. I understand if the husband, new husband, is never been married before, you need 7. And if it's an alman, you only need 1 day. So the Gemara says, it could be that we're talking about an alman. If this alman is married to an alman, so we said only 1 day of brachas, of Sheva Brachas, but 3 days of simcha. Yes, you only say the brachas for 1 day, Sheva Brachas for 1 day, but he spends 3 days with her together without going to work. Spend 3 days together. After that, they had enough. But Bacher Shiva, it could be Smear Bacher. When this almana that we're speaking about, that you should stay with her for 3 days, could be a Bacher. Shiva lebracha b'shloshim. Again, 3 days he has to spend with her, but 7 days of brachas. So
in the 3 days you need brachas.
no. In the case of the bacher, you have 7 days of
Right,
brachas.
but in the case of an almond.
Almond, oh no, 1 day for bracha and 3 days of spending together.
But you don't need brachas.
You don't need brachas. You only need brachas for 1 day. So that's what we're saying now. That an almana, that if it's an almana and almana, both of them are previously married, you only have sheva brachas for 1 day. If one of them has not been married before, either one of them, then you have sheva brachas for 7 days. Meisvei, is that really the case? It says in the Gemara on base now. Psula shiva ulamana yom echad. Says you make for a psula, you make for 7 days. Shiva means shiva yamim. Sheva brachot. We're talking about sheva brachot for shiva yamim. Ulamana yom echad, 1 day. My love, you just said that what Rav the Zavdam Rav say that whether it's a psula or an almana, 7 days. I said almana not. No. An almana, we're talking about almana, where's it 7 days? If the almana marries a boy who's never been previously married, right? A single boy who's never been previously married. So my love, but here he says, no, a psula is 7 days and almana is always 1 day. My love, I feel almana and this is labacher, because he said almana is always 1 day. So even if marries a bacher, and you said before that almana marries a bacher, 7 days. Slow. La'almas being almana. Aval bacher my, but for a boy who's never been married, my shiva, you do keep sheva brachas for shiva yamim for 7 days. Yochi listening to psula shiva should say you should be more specific. Say for a psula you always have sheva brachos for 7 days. Ula almana shenis lebacher also shiva yamim. Ula almana yom echad. No almana, if an almana marries an almana, it's only 1 day. So why don't you say that specifically? This is our question. There's no question that psula is always 7 days, and an almana with an almana is always 1 day of sheva brachas. But the issue is an almana who marries a bacher. If you're saying it's 7 days, why didn't you say that? There's a milsub siktani. He said something which is definite. What did he want to say? He meant to say, I guess, the lek of psula the basim shiva, psula is always 7 days, and like almana the basim. I want to tell you what's definite. What's definite is that almana always has sheva brachas for at least 1 day. And a psula always has for at least 7 days, even if a psula marries an almond. You have cases where a person who's been previously married marries a psula now. That happens, right? So a psula is always 7 days. And an almana is always a minimum of 1 day. In other words, a psula is minimum of 7 days. That's definite. And almana is minimum of 1 day. But if an almana marries a bacher, and that would be 7 days as well. So it's not a kasha on that. Kufa. How do you know that the sheva brachas that we make has to have with 10 people? Where do you get that from? So learn that from Boaz. Boaz took 10 men. Now, what did he do over there? You remember what happened was he went to the Ploni Almani who did not want to marry Rus because he said somebody was ahead of him in line. In those days, the levirate marriage was considered to be not like we just finished 4 months of Yavamas, where it's always only Reuven's brother. When Reuven died with no children, that's the only Yibam. There is no other Yibam there. But in those days, it's considered, the concept is that somebody in the family should take over. This was considered, and Boaz said that even though he is a distant relative, there was somebody closer. The other guy says, I don't want that. I don't want any trouble. You do it. So he took 10 people and he get it together. And as we'll see, they also paskined over there. The question is, Rus was a Moaviyah. How is he allowed to marry her? So they darshan Ammoni below Ammonit, Moavi below Moaviyah. So therefore they were allowed to. That's what they darshan, and that's why he was allowed to marry her, right? Below Moavit or Moaviyah. So
we learned over there in the previous Gemara that you only needed 3 people for to do Chalitza. You didn't need 10 people to do Yibam.
Oh, you didn't need 10 people to Yibam. So here, you don't need 10. We're not talking about the Yibam over here. We're talking about now, at this point, you're raising a good point. What do you need 10 people for at all? So at this point, we're saying that the proof here is that you needed 10 people for Sheva Brachas. Nothing to do with the Yibam. He wasn't really Yibam anyway, but even if you call that Yibam, wasn't really Yibam, and you don't need 10 people for Yibam. You just need 2 people for him to make sure that he did Yibam, that he married her. Every Kol Davar Shebe'erev is not less than 2. But the other question was, we're discussing this issue. It said Boaz called 10 people together, apparently for the Sheva Brachas. That's how you know. For what?
Why would you assume
that
he called 10 people for Sheva Brachas? Why not for the Kedusha? I know we don't, but I'm
the
saying
Kedusha of
Dushin.
Oh, Kedusha. You don't need 10 people. You don't need 10 people for kedushin. Like he just says.
understand, but
No.
this part-
Oh, that's how he darshan. We're going to see another drasha. And why did he need siknei here? We're going to talk about that. But you're right. You don't need 10 people for kedushin. You don't need 10 people for, and you don't need ziknei here for shevrachas. Those of us who have attended shevrachas know that sometimes we bring the dregs of society to the shevrachas. Anybody could show up, right? We don't take that. That's not because Canaan, right? You don't want Canaan. They'll make speeches, So by Yomer, and he said shvu po. So he says, okay, he took 10 people. Why did he take 10 people for? Why did he need 10 people? Must be for Sheva Brachas. That's how he darshans it. That's what Huna Bar Nosan said. He learned. How do you know? Birchas comes with 10 from that pasuk. Rabbi Vu says, no, that's not how you know. You taka need 10 people. They're not from there. Pasuk says in Tillim, b'makelos baruch elakim. In assemblies, they bless God. Hashem mi makor Yisrael. Hashem mi makor Yisrael. What does it mean, makor? Makor is a nice way of saying the source, the womb. So we're talking about inyanim of the womb, of getting married. B'makelos baruchim. They bless God. B'makela. What does it? Makela means an assembly, a gathering. And Rashi points out in the third line in Rashi from the top of the page, al birchas makor, on bachar makor, meaning of the womb. Sarach kahal b'hainu asara. How do you know that Karl is asara? Because it says kamo hakeles Ada, gather the Ada. And how much is an Ada? Eina hakel pachas mi Ada. Ada asara, like we said, me'adas meraglim, right? Me'adas meraglim. Ad mosei la'Ada harazeh, right? Hashem said, how long am I going to have this bad assembly of people? Who are we referring to? The meraglim. How many meraglim were there? Well, 12 were sent out. But Kalev and Yoshua were tzaddikim. They reported the truth. Who were the bad guys? The bad guys were the 10. So you learn from the spies that an Ada is 10, and Hakel Ada means you gather. That means you gather 10 people together. That's how you know when it comes to Makor, when it comes to inyanim of marriage, you need for Sheva Brachas you need 10 people. Not that you need for kedushin, but for the bracha you need 10 people. For Rav Nachman, what does Rav Nachman do? Rav Nachman learns it out from Boaz. What does he do with that pasuk of Makelos Baruch Shem Yisrael? Famous Russian Miboy Lekretanya. We learn how Rav Meir Omer. How do we know that even the unborn fetuses at the Red Sea, they also said the Shira? They all sang the Shira. Even unborn fetuses sang the Shira. Shneimar b'makelos baruch elakim. They bless God in assemblies. Hashem mi makor Yisrael. Even from those in the womb, they bless God even from the makor. That's his drush. Meir said. The idach, the other one, meaning what is Rabbi Vu, who learns that Makelos Baruch Elakim is speaking to us about marriage, not about blessing God from the womb at the yam. The idach imkein lemar kami betan. It should say, the ones in the womb, meaning in her stomach, in her womb, they bless God. My mi makor. Why use the lashon of makor? Say from the betan. We all know the fetuses are in the. Why that lashon of makor? Makor is more like the lower area, like the uterus. My mi makor al iske makor. We're talking about marriage, and that's where we're dealing with the womb where the baby is. That's called more like the betan. So therefore, he says that the drasha is for marriage. What is Rav Nachman? You guys also didn't like the drasha from Boaz, about how do you know he's speaking about Sheva Brachas. What does Rav Nachman do with that? Rav Nachman, Rabbi Vu, who learns out that you need a minyan of 10 people, a quorum for Sheva Brachas. What does he do with that pasuk of Vayika Chasara Anoshim Yizik the of Boaz? What does he do with the pasuk of Boaz? Help me boil the medrash to dashnis Amoni below Amonis, Moavi below Amovis. In other words, he took 10 Canaan to make the drasha to say, listen, I want you to. We're making a psak here. I'm going to marry Rus, who is a convert, but am I allowed to marry her? After all, she's a Moabite woman. The answer is yes, because the pasuk says lo Amoni below Moavi lo Yavo Amoni Moavi Bekal Hashem. Only a male, an Ammoni, not an Ammonius, only a male Moabite, not a female Moabite. All right, how do I know that's the drasha? If you say like you, Rav Nachman wants to say that he called 10 guys in there for Sheva Brachas, Osagi loves Canaan. It's not good enough if they're not Canaan. Why do they have to be Canaan? Why, if you have Sheva Brachas, like we say, you bring any guy in, bring any 10 shnooks in, and you get the Sheva Brachas. They have to be Skanim. Why Dafka Skanim? It must be, why is it called Skanim? he brought Skanim in for a psak halacha. These were elders, these were rabbis, to say, listen, I want you all to give the gushpanka, the seal, that I'm allowed to marry her. Pardon? Why 10? So why 10? They good kasha. Either they'll say, if it's just for the drasha, what do I need 10 for? You just said that what? If it's for bracha, I don't need elders. Yeah, but why do I need 10? That's exactly what the Gemara asks your kasha. If you're just coming for the drasha, why do I need 10 people for? It says, you needed to publicize it. Shmuel said to Rav Chana from Baghdad. Interesting that Rashi tells us over here, Baghdad was a city in Bavel, right? That was a city in Bavel. So like we don't know that. I guess today we know that maybe then it wasn't such a big city. He says, bring me 10 people. I'm going to paskin in front of them that an unborn child can acquire something if somebody else acquires it. Obviously, an unborn child can't make a king themselves, but somebody else is allowed to acquire something for an unborn child and with effect. It has effect. The Gemara Paskins is that it doesn't work. But he told them, I bring in 10 people to publicize the issue. So the answer is, according to Rav Avu, what's the drush? What's the story with Boaz for? Story of the Boaz to teach me Amoni below Moadas. That's why he had elders. Why do you have 10? To publicize the matter. According to the other pshat, according to Nachman, no, that pasuk is to teach me Sheva Brachas needs 10. Either way, however you learn, Sheva Brachas is with 10 people. If you don't have 10 people, you don't make Sheva Brachas, right? You have 10 people. And as we'll see, at least one of them has to be a Param Chadashis, as we know. Interesting that this week, you have, we're starting the 3 weeks. And one of the things in the 3 weeks is that you don't get married, you don't perform weddings during the 3 weeks, right? Everybody makes a wedding before, after the 3 weeks. That's what it says, that it's not proper to get married. So Rav Zilberstein, who's from Bnei Brak, and he lives in Ramat Gan, he was the son-in-law of Rav Yashiv. So he gives a Shiur. I listened to a Shiur yesterday. He says the interesting thing. He once gave a psak that you about something that you could get married in the 3 weeks. Give a psak to somebody lechatchila to get married in the 3 weeks, and he said you could. And he said he ran it by Rav Yashiv, and he agreed with him. So what was the case? He said there was somebody made Aliyah from Russia years ago, and they said they came from a small village. There was no Jews there. There was no nothing. There was no rabbi. There was no nothing. So they got married as a common law. They got married together. They made Aliyah now. And so they came to this. The question came up, now they can get a proper wedding. So wait till after the 3 weeks. Wait till after 3 weeks to make a proper wedding. So, but they were living as man and wife. Wouldn't it be better for them to be married properly? So in the case like that, he married them even during the 3 weeks. Rav Yasha said, do it quietly. In other words, without any public temper, just have 2 Eidim. So he did it in his house. He got 2 Eidim to do it, not to have a big public thing. But he allowed to get married, right? That it's better that they should be married halachically, and that they should, rather than they should live in sin. And in that case, what's he going to do? Tell them to go part ways till after the 3 weeks. They didn't even probably know what the 3 weeks were. So he explained them, and in the case like that, he married them in 3 weeks. Yeah, so I guess they didn't have Sheva Brachas there. You understand? That's it.
The Uber is just the Hagav. There's nothing. The case here.
No, the reason is, as you mentioned over here, because what does Rav Nachman do with Rav Avu's pasuk? It's a famous drasha, right? I feel that Rabbi said that a lot of drashas about that. Rosh Shivcha Shaviyah Masha Lo Ra Yecheskel Ben Buzi, right? A lot of things said about the about the parting of the sea, all that. And one of the things that's said about it is that here it's just brought down because that's what Rav Nachman does with Rav Avu's pasuk. Rav Avu says that pasuk teach me that you need 10 people for Sheva Brachas, and Rav Nachman says no, that's what that pasuk is.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Which pasuk are they referring?
But Makelos Barcho Lokim Hashem Makor Yisrael. Right. Rabbi Avu says that teaches you that you have to have a minyan for Sheva Brachas, and Rav Nachman, who loses the minyan, how do you know Sheva Brachas from Boaz, learns that pasuk for the concept of the Uber praising God, of the Uber praising God. Yeah. What? Yeah. Tanur Rabbanan. Mavarchim birchas chasanim beis chasanim. Okay, they say birchas chasanim, which we return to as the Sheva brachas. They do birchas chasanim, meaning at the chuppah. You don't do it before, apparently. No, even in the Erisim. Again, today we do it together, so it doesn't make a difference. But in those days, when they had the Erisim before the Nesuin, maybe months before, even a year before, so the Afbes Erisim Mavarchanosa, you even make the bracha there. Amar Abaye said, I'll tell you, I'll explain Rabbi Yehuda. When Rabbi Yehuda said that he did the base Erisim, that's because in Yehuda the custom was, not in Shomron, but in Yehuda the custom was that they would let the Chassan and Kala have a date. They would put them together in a room. In other words, in other areas they would do it like the Hasidim do. They make a shidduch and the Chassan and Kala don't see each other. Here he says they would put them together and have them together, because they have yichud in order for him to feel comfortable. They don't want to meet. They don't want them to meet for the first time at the wedding, so they make a yichud. That's why, yeah. But no, he says that's why even at the Erison, he says out the Erison, because they make a bracha there, because the Chassan and Kala get together there, so you make the brachas there too. Even the Sheva brachas, even at the Erison. Tanya Yich, another bride said, "Mavarchim birchas chasanim beis chasanim." The birchas chasanim again, the Sheva brachas you do when they get married with the chuppah. Birchas Erison, the base Erison. And the Erison you do in a base Erison. Notice you not that you do the birchas chasanim, but when Rav Yehuda said even base Erison, so he said, okay, that's only in Yehuda because the Chassan and Kala get together there, so we make Sheva brachas for them even there, which wasn't common throughout Israel. But in the birchas, the other bride says no. At a chuppah you did Sheva brachas. Birchas Erison, at the Erison you just make birchas Erison, which is what we do. Right, birchas Erison, the base Erison. Birchas Erison, my bar. What's the birchas Erison? That's the bracha that we make at a wedding today. When that whole bracha that the Masada Kedushin makes is really birchas Erison. What is my mavarach? So Rabban bar Ravada, Rabba bar Ravada, these two sons of Ravada, Tavai Mishmei Rabbi Yehuda said like this. This is the bracha, and this is the bracha that we're familiar with. Bracha to Hashem Lakem Machom Hashem Hashem Tzvanu Al Arayas. Hashem commanded us about forbidden relationships. But also learn us arusos, and he even forbade us arusos. And Rashi points out over here, interesting. Here Rashi says the whole question is yichud. We know yichud is also you're not supposed to be secluded with a woman that's not your wife, and that's not your children or your mother. You're not supposed to be secluded. So many Rishonim learn out from the Gemara about Zara that it's really Doraisa. It's like a Doraisa, but there's no specific pasuk. There's a pasuk on Yisischa ben Imecha. It's more like a asmachta. But some say it's a Doraisa, some say it's not. In any case, that yichud with a forbidden woman is generally assumed to be Doraisa in some form. It's not necessarily one of the Tariq mitzvahs, but it's like a Doraisa. Like we say many times, Gavasha says about Sar Balachayim. It's not a specific. It's not in the Tariq mitzvahs, but it's a Doraisa. Then he says that the rabbis were gozer, meaning David HaMelech came along and gozer even on a pnuya. You're not supposed to be secluded even with a single girl. And the afarusa lo chuppah, and they were not matter. Even arusa, you shouldn't have yichud with her until you come into the chuppah. Ubebracha, kebrishas kala b'lo bracha asur lebala kenida. Okay, so you have to, so here that's part of the bracha. You say shek sham tzvon ala rayas. So here Rashi says, by the way, if it's the rabbis, right, who asred the arusas us, hitalanas and asus only were matter, only matter to be with women who are married to us, like they chuppah b'kedushin. So what's Hashek Shamza Sipon? It's the same thing I said by Chanukah, because where did Hashem didn't command us, the Rabbanim command us. The answer is lo sasur, that we're supposed to listen to the rabbis also. But Rabban Rashi says, Nami Barchim b'tzivanu b'asar lanu kedashkim b'ner Chanukah. We find where's Hashek Shamza Sipon? We say Hashek Shamza Sipon ladik ner shel Chanukah. Hashem didn't command us. There's no Chanukah in the Torah. The answer is, but the Chacham said to us, we have a mitzvah of lo sasur, we have a mitzvah to listen to the Chacham. So that's the bracha that we make. Even though minat Torah, the arusa is not offered to be with, to sleep with, but the rabbi said no, not until Nesuin. Rav, that's what we call also, in Yiddish is saying in Hebrew also, you give chuppah kedushin. Give chuppah kedushin. It was the kedushin before the chuppah, right? Kedushin is usually before the chuppah. That's the lashon idea chuppah kedushin. He ends off with the bracha. He has an ending. a closing, a conclusion, right? And some, so he says, who ended off? Rav Acha ended it off with that bracha too. Some did. Mandalo Chasim, the one who doesn't end off that way, immediately every birchas peros mitzvahs that don't go into other topics without Rashi's, without different bakoshas. You can say bar parades and that's it, or a mitzvah, laniach tefillin, right? You don't have a separate bracha afterwards. Uman the Chasim, the one who does end off, immediately davi kedusha, because we mentioned in an asher kacham v'tzivanu, and we mentioned kedushin, so it's like kiddush. In Kiddush, we say a bracha at the end, Mikadosh Shabbos or Mikadosh Yisrael Bazmanim. Right? Keeping the Beloshin Kedusha, Rashi says, Kiddush Hayom Chasmin. We close it off with a bracha at the end. Kiyosim the Chasmin Mishum Diesh Bahefsik there, because we say Kidon Kiyom Chil Makrei Kodesh, there's a hefsik in the middle. By Kiddush, we mention other things in the middle, so we end up with a bracha too. So this is like Kiddush, so we end it up with a bracha too, and that's what we do. Right? If you look in the Nusach, Aydei Chubav Kiddushin, Bracha Hashem, Kadesh Yisrael, Aydei Chubav Kiddushin. Amen. So we said everybody agrees that Sheva Brachas has to be with 10 people, right? Kol Shiva, all 7 days. All 7 days we learned that's for a Sula or an Almana who's married to a Bachur. Bachur meaning a boy who's not been married. Amar B'Yehuda, that's only if somebody new has shown up. Shabbos is also Panim Chadashis. Saying Shabbos you don't need another person, because Panim Rashi Tosfos points out the last Tosfos on the page. Said Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, when Shabbos comes, Mizmor Shilayim Shabbos Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Panim Chadashis Polakan, Nomer Shir, let's say a Shira. Asnami Mar Milcha Shabbos. That's when somebody new shows up. There's like a new Simcha. He hasn't joined us yet. Now it's like a new Simcha. Somebody else is coming. Let's rejoice. Oh, here we have another guest. Let's sing some more. So that's the idea of Panim Chadashis. So again.
Even though Shabbos is a Malkah, not a man.
Yeah, okay, but it's still Panim Chadashot. They're all Panim, right? Just what bracha what are the brachas that we make? So every time, what are the Sheva brachas? I don't think so, because we talk about the 10. The 10 needs men. Yeah, but of the 10, in other words, Kol Shiva, during the 7 days, we say Basar. Sar means men, and that's Panim Chadashis usually mean the man. We don't count the women here. My Mavarach. What are the brachas that we make? So here he lists these 6 brachas besides Bar Peragafen. If you've ever made a wedding, I've messed that up at a wedding. Those cards that they give out. In other words, at a wedding, the Bar Peragafen is said first. So use a sitter unless they have a special one for a wedding. A smart rabbi will come with a piece of with a brachas in front of him. Because I once messed that up. I used one of those cards for the Sheva brachas at the wedding, and that's the wrong order. Did the wrong order at the wedding. Yeah. Anyway, so besides the Bar Peragafen, which is one of the 7, right? You make a bracha at the Sheva brachas at a meal or at the feast. It's the last bracha. So here at the wedding at the chuppah, they start off with the Bar Peragafen, and then what are the next brachas? Number 1, She'akol Baruch Chvodo, right? Now this has nothing to do with the Chasan and Kala, as Rashi points out. She'akol Baruch Chvodo is everything is made for God, meaning when they gather together. They could have said that bracha right away. That's the cover of makom, and people are coming together for a simcha. So technically, they could have made that bracha as soon as they sat down to eat. In other words, not just at the Shabbat later on. As soon as they got together there, as the people came together for the wedding or for the feast, could have said that. But it's better to do it a la kos. It's better when you have brachas, you make them a la kos. Check out bracha. The second one is Yotzer Adam. Again, talking about God's creation. Again, this has nothing to do with the wedding itself, but if we're giving shvach todah to Hashem, because Hashem created people, right? So that's Hashem created the people, and therefore we start. That's the second bracha. Second bracha is Yotzer Adam, right? So
the person who makes the Bar Peragafen doesn't drink.
He drink right at the end. Oh, you can make it because you make a bracha for other people. That's no problem.
You have to have that.
Yeah, he's meant to be Yotzi. Of course, you have bracha Yotzi, and he shouldn't be mafsik in between. Of course. Yeah, okay. He doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. Somebody else can drink. Yeah, somebody else can drink. You don't have to drink yourself. You can make a bracha for somebody else, right? So that's another thing that he brought up the Shaila. That some have permitted this month of Shabbos is also Shavas B'Tamas. Right. Some have it meaning not to drink wine at all during the 3 weeks. Most of us just have Ashkenazim only during the 9 days, but also even those who don't have a minute for the 3 weeks. But since it's actually Shavas B'Tamas, they don't drink wine. So what they do is they bring it to a kid. There was a story with so you give it to a kid to drink. So he told this, I'm going to make Abdullah, make guffin, and you drink. So he made the brachas, and then he gave it to the kid, and the kid got angry, and he said, "Ma, ani Shabbos goy sholcha," and he ran away. And And the shaila was, the kid got angry, and he ran away. So does he have to make another bracha or not? So the psak was that he doesn't make another bracha because that bracha is good for anybody. Anyways, that was the story. The Yotzer Adam. Okay, so the second was Yotzer Adam, which is in general is talking about creation. Again, Adam by himself, right? Yotzer Adam, and not necessarily the wedding. Okay, that's why these two brachas were just said because we're going to say the malakos, but it's not for the wedding itself. It's just giving shvach v'odat Hashem. Then Asher Yatzaras Adam B'Tzalmo, that already is the first of the brachas that are referring to the husband and wife, and that's why we start off with Baruch Atah Hashem Elkeinu Melech Asher Yatzaras Adam B'Tzalmo. You see, the first one is Shekom Echvaro, the Yotzer Adam, and then Baruch Atah Hashem Elkeinu Melech Asher Yatzaras is the first of the series really relating to the wedding, and that's why you have a bracha at the beginning and the end, because you start off. If I have a bracha at the end. Like in Shmoneh Esrei, right? We don't make a bracha at the beginning. The beginning of bracha make a bracha at the beginning because it's the beginning of a series. But if it's a bracha was called Tzmura L'Chaver, we don't make a bracha at the beginning, only at the end. So here, this is the first this bracha we make at the beginning. He doesn't put in the Baruch Atah Hashem, but it's in there because it's the beginning of the series. And what's this bracha? This is bracha number 3. Asher Yatzaras Adam B'Tzalmo, B'Tzelem D'mus, Hashem created him in his image. B'Tzelem D'mus, his image tapni, so his form was in him. V'Iskam Amina B'Miyad, and he made for him a binyan adayad, which is Hashem made a binyan. What's the binyan? V'Ivan Asatzel, Hashem created woman from man. V'Iskam Binyan adayad, it will be a forever, an everlasting structure. Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzer Adam. Okay, that's right. The next bracha is Sos Tasis, which doesn't begin with Baruch Atah Hashem. Why? Because this is already in the series. Baruch Atah Hashem is the beginning of the series. Again, the first two are not really related to the wedding. Then the third one begins the series for the wedding, and we say Sos Tasis. What does this have to do with the wedding? Because now right? Because we have to mention Yerushalayim, right? With that, it's also. So we talk about Yerushalayim. That's the Akara, the barren woman. So maybe she rejoiced, but Tagel let her rejoice. This barren woman, when her children will come back, we'll gather into her. So this is a bracha for Yerushalayim, not really the wedding, right? But at our simcha, we have to mention Yerushalayim. Then the next, that's number 4, right? Number 5. May these good friends, these loving friends, be happy together. Like now we're talking the Chassan Kala, like Hashem who created you, Began Eden, Hashem created Adam and Chava, made them happy from early times. But here again, we're not talking about this Chassan and Kala. We're talking about in general about the idea of Chassan and Kala, that Hashem created 2 people back in the Garden of Eden. And then we talk about the chassan and kala, right? He does say it's a bracha to you. You should be like them. But we're talking about in general about chassans and kalas that Hashem made male and female to procreate and continue. And Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech. Now we come to the next bracha, which is the last bracha, what we call bracha achrita, right? Bracha achrita. We're not again. The 6, not including Baruch Hagafen. Hashem created joy and happiness, chassan v'kala, gila, rina, rejoicing and singing, ditza, dancing, chedba, and it also means like delightfulness, ava, lovingness, acham, brotherhood, shalom, peace, bereus, and friendship. Hashem. Speedily here. Maybe Hashem we should be able to hear in our Yehuda and the courts of Yerushalayim, the voice of joy and happiness. We hear the singing of the chasanim as they come out of their chuppah, and the youth from their feasts of singing. This is already the specific bracha for them that they should be, that this chassan and kala should be happy together. Levi equal Bay Rebbe. Levi attended the house of Rebbe Beilud Rav Shimon when Rebbe was marrying off his son Rav Shimon. Levi attended the wedding, and they honored him with these sheva brachas. Baruch Hamesh. He only made 5 out of these 6. We're not talking about the Bar Pragafet. Doesn't mention here. Notice he doesn't mention sheva brachot. The shiva we're talking about is days, right? But we call it the sheva brachos because there's 7. But the Birchas Chassan is really the 6. The Bar Pragafet, you'd rather say another bracha. So out of the 6, he only said 5. And Rashi says, which one did he skip? He skipped number 2. He skipped number 2, Yotzer Adam, right? He skipped the share. Now, if you look at number 2 is Yotzer Adam. Number 3 is Asher Yatzaras Adam B'Tzalmo. Okay, so that's already the beginning of the whole series. But why they're both about Yetziras Adam? So he skipped the second one. Ravasi attended the wedding that in the house of Rav Shapiro Demar Beret, when Rav Ashi made a wedding for Mar, his son. He said all 6. What's the machlok? He said Demar Saber Chadi Yetzirah. One says that what? That Hashem created man and woman together. There was only one Yetzirah. Remember the idea that he made two heads or 2 forms, 2 faces, and then he split them. One Yetzirah. That's why there's no need to mention both Yotzer Adam and Asher Yatzar. Umar Savar Shtei Yetziros. No, there were 2. That's why he said bracha number 2 and number 3, Yotzer Adam and Asher Yatzar, because there were 2 Yetziras. In other words, that Hashem first created man, and then he created her either from his tail or took the bone out, whatever it was, but it wasn't with 2 faces originally. Maybe that's the machlok. We're going to have the machlokas later on. So look, everybody says there was one Yitzir. Ma'asavar basa machshava zlinam. Once as you look at machshava, said machshava originally was what? To create them. Basa machshava. The machshava was here. Rashi says basa machshava zlinan sheshnaim ol machshava liboros v'neva echad. Hashem originally was going to create 2, and at the end he only created 1. So the machshava was 2. So he says he mentioned 2 brachas. Hashem only made 1 person. At the end, Hashem only made Adam, and he created her out of him, and therefore you go basa the ma'isa. That's the machlosi. Rav Meir Shapiro says this kashi, he had a kashi, a steer. It says and then it says later on in Parakeh it says Zachar Nekeva Bra'am. It says number 1 it says Hashem created Adam, like 1, and then it says Zachar Nekeva 2. So okay, it said the Tchila Machshava originally was going to create 2. It was self never echad. That's how it was. So that's what we could say here too. Everybody agrees that at the end he only created 1. There is a machlokas about it later on. But over here you could say everybody says he created only 1. The question is Machshava originally was 2, but he changed his mind. He only did 1. Rav Ashi Ikla, I have a kasha on this. I've had this kasha since 9th grade, and I remember somebody told me an answer, but the answer wasn't great. If you look in the pasuk in Bereshis, it says Vayivil Adam B'Tzalmo. So Zachar Nekeva Bara Osam. In the same pasuk it says Zachar Nekeva Bara Osam. So why don't you ask the pasuk itself? Why do you ask your pasuk later on Zachar Nekeva? There's an answer, but I'm not sure what the answer is. Rav Ashi Ikla, you understand? The kasha always spells better than the answer. Rav Ashi Ikla Bei Rav Kana. He went to Rav Kana. Yom Kama. The first day Baruch Hu. The first day he said all the brachas, all shabbos. Afterwards, if there's a pan chadashos Baruch Hu, then he said all the brachas. The other sense. Below. If not, if there's no new panim chadashos, even if it was a psula or a bacher where you do sheva brachos for 7 days, but if there was no panim chadashos, he didn't make the sheva bracha. He didn't make the rest. It's just continuing the first simcha. Where do you say bracha simcha ba'ono? Benching. So that's what he would do. In other words, if there was no panim chadash, he would do simcha asher bara, right? Only the last bracha. In other words, he didn't do sheva brachas. He mentioned the simcha ba'ono, and he mentioned in Zimun, assuming he had 3, and he said the last bracha, only 1 bracha, not sheva brachas, only 1 bracha. Mishiva Shloshim from the 7th day till the 30 days, after sheva brachas, 30 days, for the 7th to 30 days, whether he came because of the wedding, or if he told him, come and have a meal with me, whether he mentioned because of the wedding, or maybe some guests were still in town, they hadn't returned yet back to their homes, and they were still hanging around there between 7 and 30 days after the wedding. So when they mentioned Mavarach, you just said Shasim Kamor, that you could add on to the Zimun, but you didn't. No more of the Sheva brachas. We come after 30 days. If he said, "Listen, come together because of the wedding, you're still here. The guests are still here. It's 2 months later. You're still here." If he said because of the wedding, Baruch Shasim Kamono, Elo. But if he didn't mention because of the wedding, then they're just having a meal. He didn't even mention that. Right? And if he said because of the wedding ad Amos, till when could you say Shasim Kimono? You're saying that after 30 days, if he said because of the wedding, you mentioned Simchon. Until when? Even until 12 months, meaning a year. In other words, if you have people coming for a meal and you say, listen, my son got married, a couple of months ago, come and join us for a meal, you could still say Shasim Kimono in the Zimun, in the benching. But of course, the bracha of the Asher Bara, the last bracha that we talked about, that's not said after the 7 days at all. And even in the 7 days, if you don't have Panam Chadashis, you only say that bracha and some Kimono, and that's it. All right, we'll take it here tomorrow, Mr.
There's a confusion that seems to read it. You say Shabbat. A lot of people think you need 7 days.
Right.
Because on Shabbos you have 3 Shabbat.
That's right. That's right.
So
That's right.
you can end up with 20
This
Shabbat.
is 21. Yeah, right. No, I'll tell you what I thought about that. I think if that would be the case, we're talking about the number of brachos, the number of days, then it would be Shiva. The brachos the Sheva is going on brachot. There are 7 brachot, which are said for Shiva Yamim. So the Sheva brachos refers to or as we say, Sheva bruchas.